Hi, I'm Ian Mean. I'm former editor of the Western Daily Press. Tonight I'm talking to Paul Boissier. Paul is the Chief Executive of the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, and he's the latest subject of the University of West of England Distinguished Address Series. Paul, as Chief Executive of the RNLI, tell me about your business in the community.
Yeah, well, the RNLI has been going for 191 years and saving lives all that time, and we've had a fantastic sort of impact on the community right through the last 2 centuries. And it started with small groups of men going out in their boats, launched by their wives from small fishing communities, actually in the northeast of England and the Isle of Man, and slowly grew into a big sort of national chain of lifeboat stations going right around the coast of the British Isles and now the Republic of Ireland. But when you go to the lifeboat stations, when I go to the lifeboat stations around the coast, so I'll go to Whitby Lifeboat Station in Yorkshire or something like that, you become absolutely, it hits you in the face, this idea that this isn't the organisation, the RNLI, plonking something down in the middle of Whitby. This is something which is organically Whitby. So all the men and women who make the lifeboat work, the fundraisers, the press officers, the crew, the launching team, the mechanics, all of them, they all come from Whitby. And they all wear their little polo shirts and go to the pub saying Whitby Lifeboat, and people buy them a pint of beer. And the community is immensely proud of it. And so when we go fundraising in and around Whitby, we say to people, all of the money will go to Whitby Lifeboat Station, which of course it will do, because if you put the money in the box, you want to see that, the effect right there. And here in the West Country as well, we're just building a new lifeboat station at Portishead, and there's a tremendous amount of interest around Portishead, and also just a little bit further down the Severn Estuary, at Weston-super-Mare, there's a wonderful lifeboat station that is, it's had a tough time in the last couple of years because it's right out on the end of that crumbling pier. And we're now sort of saying, well, actually, we'd like to build a lifeboat station right on the promenade so people can walk past and see it. And it's so interesting, as people walk past the lifeboat station, they always want to come and they want to come and touch things because it's theirs, it belongs, the whole of the RNLI belongs to the community.
You're also a very, very big business, aren't you? Is it true that you're perhaps one of our most popular charities in the UK?
Well, I'd like to certainly think we are very popular. We're not one of the biggest, we are. We're up there in the top sort of 20 or 30.
What sort of turnover do you have?
We have a turnover of about £190 million a year, including sort of capital costs. And actually we need it. I mean, we spend about £50 to £60 million on capital projects.
Each year?
Each year. But the extraordinary thing about it is that, of the 35,000 people who work for us, only 1,300 are paid, and the other, whatever it is, 95% are all volunteers. It's a business model that is just almost impossible for anyone else to replicate.
And that business model truly is a community business model, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, we're now just sort of building it up as well. We're sort of coming back into the community. And for quite a long time, we've been sort of corporate RNLI, sort of spreading our well-being around the place. But more and more over the last 5 years, it's grown, the idea has grown in me that actually our roots and our heart and our strength is in the community. And so we weren't just in in fact, we already do a lot of things in the community, but we're going to bring them all together, which is lifeboating, lifeguarding, sometimes flood rescue, where we ask people to go and help the members of that community who suffer in floods. Sometimes just teaching children, going to schools and teaching children how to swim, which is, if you want to stop people drowning, the best thing you can do is teach people to swim. So we'll go into communities and help people children to learn to swim, but also at the same time give them sea safety messages. And you can combine all this into a really, really powerful package in the community, which is all about the community working together to keep people safe and save lives in their own community.
Why is the RNLI so popular, even with inland communities?
I think it's a question which I struggled with for 5 years, and I'm really delighted that it is. But I think there's 2 things really which are absolutely epitomise the RNLI. And one of them is this whole business of going and saving lives. And we are one of the communities that just, does nothing else but keep people alive, rescues people in the time of need and bring them back to the family. But the other thing is all about the people who go and do it. And the 5,000 men and women who volunteer to go out to rescue people 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, no matter what the weather. Only 1 in 10 of them has any prior maritime experience. 90% of them are volunteers. And suddenly you'll hear these wonderful stories of people in the middle of a wedding. And sometimes the bride or the groom in the middle of the wedding, the pager goes off and they scamper off. But certainly in christenings, you find all of the best men, all of the godfathers and godmothers sort of scampering off because the lifeboat needs to launch. And the people are driven, these volunteers are driven by this sort of need to get out there and save people's lives. And I think on an island that resonates, that sort of generosity of spirit resonates with the people of this island. And it's still as intense as it ever was.
Yeah. Let me talk to you about your business model, because we're talking here at the University of West of England. A lot of the audience this evening is going to be business people and indeed business students. So what is the business model going forward for the RNLI?
It's the actual business model, the dynamics, the engine of the business is the same as we've had, which is a business which is largely driven and run by volunteers, but with a few paid members of staff to add the sort of value-added bits. We get no money from the government except for about £3.5 million a year, which comes from local government as in part payment of the lifeguards, but the rest of that money comes from the community. And we do our best with that money to sort of make sure that we run this incredibly complex rescue service.
It's very little money,
right around the country.
3.5 million.
It is very little, and
spread over how many lifeboat stations?
This is for the lifeguard, so it's about 200 beaches that we lifeguard, but that's growing the whole time. Sorry, it's about 3.5 million for the lifeguards. So that's the sort of dynamics of the business. But going forward, for the next, so we've just pushed out a strategy, just created a strategy for the next 20 years, which is all about using just about this level of turnover, about £190 million a year, but spending it even more wisely than before. We've shown that we can actually make really significant efficiency gains over the last 3 years. We've taken £23 million a year out of our operating costs.
How have you done that?
Using lean methodology. And we've just gone through every single bit of the business, using the men and women who do the job. This isn't driven by me and the directors, it's driven by the men and women who do the job. They're the people who know how to do the job better. And we just put them into a room for 5 days and say, tell us what the answer is.
What sort of things have they saved on there?
Oh, a tremendous amount, just about every single part of our business. So in the Inshore Lifeboat Centre, which is a small factory that we have in Cowes on the Isle of Wight, where they build the inflatable lifeboats, the smallest class of lifeboat, which is a little, rather like a tender that you'll see people going out to.
How much do they cost?
Well, they cost about £50,000.
Right.
And we discovered that it used to take us 10 weeks to refit them. So every 5 years they're going for a 10-week refit. We put the lean process right across this. We discovered that actually by being efficient about it, we could refit them in 2 weeks.
Right.
Which meant that we needed 20 less tenders for the reserve fleet. At £50,000 each, we saved ourselves, whatever it is, £1 million, just like that of capital. So that's one side. But on the other side, for instance, with our lifeguards, we at the end of the season, we pay our lifeguards off, and then we recruit them again in the spring. Quite often the same people coming round, but we don't want to be paying them during the winter. And we had a terribly bureaucratic process for all of this. It all the papers were in the wrong place. So again, we put the lean process across this. We got all the people who do the recruiting to work out how to do it better. And we took 20% out of the time required, the man hours and woman hours required to do that, which has two fabulous effects. First of all, it costs us less to recruit them. But secondly, it doesn't upset the lifeguards so much because they were getting so frustrated with all the bureaucratic delays. And the one that I'm most proud of, because it was so obvious but actually so powerful, is because we're the lifeboats, because our lifeboats have to work, we were maintaining our lifeboats more often than they needed. So if you had a component in the engine that was live for 100 hours would probably be replacing it 60 hours of service. And that meant you'd have to go into the engine, pull it out, put another bit in, and then go another 60 hours. And we were over-maintaining our engines. And so we got all of the engineers, and it took a tremendous amount of time to go through every lifed component on all of our lifeboats and say, actually, this isn't a 60-hour component, it's actually a 200-hour component. And we now maintain them just before the end of their design life. And for the biggest class of our lifeboat, we run 7 classes of lifeboat, the biggest class, which is called the 7 class, by sort of using the components on the lifeboat properly. On that one class of lifeboat alone, we saved over £700,000 a year. We are saving over £700,000.
Now those 7 class lifeboats cost a lot of money.
They do.
How much?
The new class that we're producing, which is called the Shannon class, the first class will be named after an Irish river, they're all named after rivers, which can be launched off a slipway, comes off at about £2 million each. And we have some very generous donors. We ask, with a generous donor, we say, look, if you'd like to give us half the cost of it, we'll put your name on the side.
Right.
And that's a lovely, lovely thing for people to do.
And many of those big lifeboats are named in that way.
They are. In fact, they're just about all named in that way. The lifeboat is about £2 million, and I have to say, worth every penny. I mean, the waters around these islands are the most dangerous waters that I've ever encountered in a lifetime at sea. They're tidal, they're rough, they're rocky, they're difficult. Around here, they're muddy and shallow. There's every single possible challenge. And this 13-metre lifeboat that we've just produced, called the Shannon, produced by our own designers in our own factory, is probably, in my mind, the best lifeboat in the world, because it's the size of a small yacht, but it will go out in anything and rescue people. That's £2 million worth of lifeboat. And then the launching rig, it takes its own, on the flatter beaches, it has its own portable slipway, which can go out into the waves to launch it. The launching rig is about another £1 million on top of that. Right. And we're producing 6 of those a year.
Right. And how much do you get in legacies per year?
We get just over £1 million a year in legacies, and people are incredibly generous in leaving us money in their wills.
And why do people leave you money like that?
Well, the way I like to think about it, and when I talk to people about it, I say that if you're going to leave money to a charity, which is an incredibly generous thing to do, and it's actually very generous for their children to, when the will is published, but if people are going to leave money to the charity, isn't it just the nicest thing if that legacy lives on? Mm. And so if people will leave us money for a lifeboat in their will, and the smaller boats, are much cheaper, that's fabulous, because after you've died, the money you've earned will carry on saving other people's lives. And I think there's a sort of, people have a deep affection for the RNLI, but also this is how your money can really do some genuine, very apparent good for the community after you've gone. And what I try to do is to really respect the wishes of the person who's died, to make sure that we do make the best possible use of it. For some people, they would rather train crew for 20 years with their legacy, and we will do that. We'll do whatever they ask us to do.
Now, shouldn't the government really give you more money? Here we have lifeboat people of all ages who are risking their lives, literally, 365 days a year. Shouldn't they actually give you more money?
Well, I have to say that the RNLI is one of the very few areas, well, not unique, but one of the very few areas in British public life where you ask volunteers for no pay and no recognition to go out and put themselves at risk and sometimes put their lives at risk. And that is an extraordinary thing. And I think,
are you unique in that?
No, we're not. There are mountain rescue teams, so there are some places,
yeah.
but we're pretty few and far between, actually. And we're certainly the biggest organisation which does that. And that doesn't make us unique, but it makes us very, very special. But it's rather a matter of pride that we don't take government money. We've never taken government money for the last 2 centuries. I think if you and I were sitting down together today with a clean sheet of paper saying, shall we start up the RNLI? First of all, we'd have a very different business model. Yeah. But secondly, it would be almost impossible not to take government money because the capital requirements, and we'd have to have a lot more employees because there wouldn't be the same sort of volunteering teams around. I think one would have to take government money. But actually, without government money, I mean, first of all, the public is kind enough to support us. And if we had government money, it would come from tax revenue anyway. So you and I and members of the public pay for this service one way or the other. First of all, the public is kind enough to support us. Secondly, with so many volunteers, which I don't think the government would be able to replicate, I believe that we can do the service much, much cheaper than the government could. And thirdly, we don't have the constraints of government policy to endlessly adhere to, or the constraints of variable government money. And this is, in my job as the chief executive, it requires long-term planning. It doesn't require that 5-year timescale. We're planning lifeboats out to 20 years now. And it's very nice to if we fail to provide the money, then it's our fault, not the government's fault. And we're very much masters of our own destiny. So I think it serves us, because of circumstances, not to be like that. And I think the public is happy that we're not paid by the government, as long as we're competent and we use the money well. And this whole business of transparency is terribly, terribly important.
And your biggest challenge now going forward?
I think sort of functionally, the biggest challenge is building our prevention service, because we're very good at rescue. We are absolutely world-class at rescue. But one of the questions one has to ask oneself is, why does someone have to get into trouble so that we go out to rescue them to do it? And when I look around the number of people who drown on these islands each year, there's 400 people who drown, 67 of them on the coast, notwithstanding the best efforts of all our lifesavers. And many of them are men, because as you and I know, men are almost impossible to say, don't do something. If someone comes up to you and says, don't do it, you're going to have a go at it sometimes, especially if you're slightly younger. Many of them are men, and when we've said to people, you must wear a life jacket in your boat, they'll say, no, I never wear a life jacket, and just go on like that. And so the real challenge is to go out with a tone of voice and a message that men are able to make themselves receptive to. And it's not that the sea is necessarily an impossibly dangerous space. It certainly is dangerous, it certainly is unpredictable. But if you and I go out on the water, to actually have some knowledge and to take the right precautions makes it so, so much safer. And if people are able to listen to our safety messages, then we can say, they may just be able to avoid becoming one of those fatalities that goes up on the wall as someone who's died on the water. And I think it is terribly, terribly important that we try and get that prevention message out and about.
Thank you.